It is my pleasure to introduce Barbara Taft. She is the co-chair of our WILF Middle East Committee, now called Middle East Peace and Justice Action Committee. She has visited the Middle East many times and is co-authored our Hamas booklet, which is a very interesting part of our history, I would say, that I am very proud of. She served on the WILF National Board and Baptist Peace Fellowship of North America, et cetera, et cetera. And she is going to bring to us some speakers that we've been waiting for. So thank you, Barbara. Let's see, there we go.
Thank you, Tina. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes? Okay.
It may be a little bit louder for those of us who are.
Okay.
We can hear you. Thank you, Barbara.
Okay. We have a strange type of panel today. I have to start off by saying that. We were supposed to have two live speakers, one of whom is with us, Mazin Qumsiyeh, but the other speaker, Rabbi Arik Ascherman, realized that it will still be Shabbat here in the US, and he decided that he couldn't speak to us live. So he has sent us some film clips that he sent on MP4, and we'll be able to look at that. He answered most of the questions that I asked, and so that's useful to us. Let me give you a little bit of the biography of each of the speakers before we get started, and then we'll move on into the question period. Mazin Qumsiyeh was born in 1957 in Beit Sahur, known in English as Shepherd's Field. He's a Palestinian scientist and author. Currently, he serves as the founder and director of the Palestinian Museum of Natural History and the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability. Those are both at Bethlehem University. He also teaches there, and he served as, he served on the faculties when he was in the US of the University of Tennessee, Duke University, and Yale University. He researches and teaches at Bethlehem and Birzeit universities in the West Bank since he returned to Palestine in 2008 with his wife, Jessie. He joined other professors to introduce the first biotechnology master's program in the region, and over the course of his career, he's published well over 150 scientific papers on topics ranging from natural or cultural heritage, rather, to biodiversity, as well as several books. He also serves on the board of a number of Palestinian youth and service organizations. And I want to just mention one other thing that isn't in the bio listing in your program, and that is that while he was here in the US, and I think before he became a professor, probably while he was a student, he was an activist working for many of the things that we work for. And so he has definitely got his creds with us. I'm also going to tell you about Rabbi Arik Ascherman. He's an American-born Israeli Reform rabbi and executive director of the Israeli human rights organization Torah Tzedek, which means Torah of Justice. For 21 years, starting in 1995 or 1996, he served as co-director and executive director and director of special projects and president and senior rabbi for Rabbis for Human Rights, which is what he was mainly involved with when I first met him. It's an Israeli organization, a very good one. He's also affiliated with the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions and has worked along with Jeff Halper on that project. He's also been attacked by both Israeli military police and by settlers, as well as arrested for his nonviolent activism. He's currently working to protect sheep herders from being forced out of their grazing areas and their occupations. And so, two important people to hear from. And if all goes well, we'll do that. Do want to mention at first that for the last few weeks, the members of our Middle East Peace and Justice Action Committee, or MEPJAC, have been actively putting together an annotated bibliography about the Middle East, and it's going to be available. If some of you would like that, you can please put your email address in the chat, and Tura Campanella Cook will be able to capture that, and we'll make sure that you get that. And before too long, we're going to be posting that list online. We also have a shorter list of films, videos, and short clips that might be of interest to you. And if you want either of those, just let us know. So now I want to say good morning, good afternoon, whatever time of day, or even good evening to all of you. And I want to especially thank Mazin Qumsiyeh, who's sharing the screen with me right now. Mazin is in Christchurch, New Zealand. Is that right, Mazin?
Actually in Queenstown now.
Okay. He's been moving around because he's been on a speaking tour in Australia and New Zealand. And as you probably know, they are in a totally different time zone. And so for him, it's 6:30 a.m. and we really appreciate him doing this. Okay. All right. Mazin is involved in a lot of things, some of which involve water. The theme that we chose for today's program, the title is, I have to look it up so I get it exactly right.
Try to project a little bit more, Barbara, so people can hear you.
Okay. Water is life, especially during wartime. And we got the idea for that title based on an Arabic saying, Bidun Maya Fish Haya, which is, without water, there's no life. Okay, and I think that's pretty basic to everything that we're doing in this Congress at this time. So he's going to talk about a variety of things related to water and to biodiversity, which he works on very much. And I'm going to ask him questions and he'll respond, and then we'll move on to the presentation from Rabbi Ascherman. Mazin, first, tell us about your Institute for Biodiversity.
Thank you for having me. Our institute, Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability, was started by my wife and I and a few other volunteers 10 years ago. The idea is sustainable human and natural communities to work towards sustainability. And of course, we depend on nature, so we must protect both humans and nature and reconnect humans to the land. We work with women, children, everybody, especially marginalized communities like Bedouins and villagers, to empower them and make sure that they are able to achieve, at least a standard of living, at least being able to live even under colonial occupation, and most importantly, to be able to resist the onslaught of colonialism. And ultimately, it's a process of decolonization that we want to engage in. But in the meantime, as the Buddhists say, we try to have joyful participation in the sorrows of this world.
very, very good summary. You know that our theme this year is related to water, and I want to know what you can tell us about the sources of water in Palestine and the ways in which Israel restricts access to water.
If you would allow me to share my screen, I want to show you a couple of pictures. So here's just a minute. Very briefly, I mean, Palestine, of course, is a critical area. It's intersection of continents. It's where humans migrated out of Africa to the rest of the world. It still is a land bridge for even bird migration from Europe to Eurasia to Africa every year. And it's the place of the Fertile Crescent, part of the Fertile Crescent, where humans first developed agriculture, first domesticated plants like olives and wheat and barley and lentils, chickpeas, but also where we first domesticated animals like goats and sheep and camels. The area is, of course, colonization impacts all of this. This is settler colonization. But in terms of water, Palestine is not short on water. We have a lot of water resources. We have lakes, we have rivers, etc. But colonization has impacted those areas and impacted access to water. For example, when Israel diverted the water of the Jordan River basin from Lake Tiberias to the west, it dried up the Jordan River, produced deserts basically in the Jordan River area. And you can see the Jordan River dropped from 1,350 million cubic meters per year to only 20 million cubic meters per year. That's basically a tiny stream. You can jump across it or walk across it. This is devastating to lives and livelihood of people in the Jordan Valley. And this has been going on for 7 decades now. Palestine, like other countries, gets water. In fact, we get more water in Ramallah than in London. And you can see here the problem. The problem is that in London, water goes in the aquifer and comes back to be used by the British society, whereas in our case, water is stolen. It falls on Ramallah or other places, goes into the aquifer, and then Israel refuses to allow Palestinians to have access to their own water, wants us to starve us to basically of water. And this is not because Israel needs water or the Israelis need water. It is to waste water, to remove it from local indigenous people access so that life becomes intolerable for us. Another example of this in Lake Hula and the wetlands of the Hula, these were drained by Israel. There were 12 Palestinian communities around the Hula area. The picture on the right-hand corner shows 3 Palestinian women before 1948 harvesting wheat, harvesting reeds for furniture and for building houses from these wetlands. All these Palestinian communities were removed, but also this meant the removal of the livelihood of other species. So 219 species disappeared. And finally, I'll say about the Gaza Strip, because the Gaza Strip is the coastal water aquifer that is no longer usable. As you know, from many years, not just because of the current war, Israel has not allowed the aquifer to be refilled by natural flow, they remove the natural flow from upstream, and this has resulted in drying up of the aquifer. This, combined with increased use, basically depleted the aquifer and became pretty much non-usable. But then it got worse recently because Israeli forces pumped seawater into the tunnels that the resistance moved, sort of like the tunnels that the Viet Cong used to resist the American occupation. Israel pumped seawater into them, and that goes into the aquifer, of course, because of the nature of the soil in Gaza. So pretty much Gaza Strip has become unlivable because of Israeli actions. And I could go on, but I think probably enough for now, and happy to expand if you want.
Yeah, actually, let's talk a little bit more specifically about the situation in Gaza and access to clean water. For instance, the consequences of not being able to access it.
Well, Gaza Strip is a concentration camp that has been created in 1948 to house the unwanted Palestinians. 70% of its population are refugees that were pushed out from their fertile areas to the north and east of the Gaza Strip in what became the state of Israel in 1948, a Jewish state on top of Palestinian land. So it has 2.3 million Palestinians. There was a meticulous process of de-development of the Gaza Strip. This is well explained in detail in the book by Sarah Roy, an economist at Harvard University, who wrote a book about de-development of Gaza. That's the title of the book, De-Development of Gaza. The colonial system intends to de-develop Palestinian areas to make them unlivable. This is not new. This started in 1948, of course, but it's accelerating, just like the genocide and the ecocide in our country started earlier. It was incremental, and now it's accelerated genocide and ecocide. For example, Gaza, some 90% plus of its vegetation cover has been removed in the past 8 months, but there was an ecocide happening before that in Gaza and elsewhere in Palestine. So when you come to water issues in the Gaza Strip, this is part and parcel of the making Gaza unlivable and getting rid of Gaza, because Israel also is intent on continuing to use the gas fields off of Gaza. That's a real reason for the war in Gaza, actually. There are hundreds of billions of dollars worth of gas off the coast, and Israel is already exporting that to replace Russian gas that used to flow to Europe. But in terms of water, water is life, of course. And once you remove accessibility of water, in the case of Gaza, it started about 40 years ago by Israel damming the flow from the Hebron Mountains towards Gaza and preventing that water from reaching Wadi Gaza, which was a beautiful nature reserve area with a lot of wildlife and really, functioning river system. But anyway, Israel dried that up a few decades ago as they blocked its replenishment. But that also blocked the replenishment, as I said earlier, of the water aquifer underneath Gaza. so you couldn't get water from underneath Gaza. Combined with, of course, Israel's denial of electricity. Again, this is long before October 7, before October 7, 2023, electricity was allowed 1 hour a day, and there were not enough fuel and not enough generators because of Israeli blockade and siege on Gaza. And of course, when you have 1 hour a day of electricity, you cannot even extract water from the aquifer because you need water pumps. And so the operation of the water pumps and stuff is limited. Sewage treatment, of course, you cannot do sewage treatment with 1 hour a day. So sewage was being dumped into the sea that creates pollution, hygiene problems, etc. All of this happened before October 7. Since October 7, it was made even more destructive when Israel denied everything to Gaza, including medicine, women hygiene, everything. So it has been catastrophic. Over 1 million Gazans now have illnesses like hepatitis and lung infections and intestinal issues. So the healthcare in Gaza has collapsed. Israel also bombed the hospitals. 21 of 36 hospitals were destroyed. 15 remaining hospitals barely function as first aid centers because there's hardly any medicines left in Gaza with the tightened blockade since October 7. So even anesthesia is not allowed. So, over 1,500 people have had their limbs amputated, for example, without anesthesia. I could go on, but the situation in Gaza is catastrophic in terms of water, in terms of the environment, in terms of healthcare, in terms of food, of course. Literally, people are dying of starvation. For milk, formula is not allowed into Gaza also. So babies are dying who have no access to milk. Even when their mothers are alive, of course, their mothers having no food, they cannot nurse their babies. So the children are dying, and there's probably now more dying from diseases and from starvation and lack of clean water than there are being directly killed by the bombings with American-made bombs.
Thank you. I'm glad that you elaborated on what's going on in Gaza. And the one thing that I want to mention is that even before October 7th, the Israelis were restricting the delivery of food, water, etc. And they were terming it putting the Gazans on a diet. And that means that before this latest incursion and fighting, a lot of people were already at a deficit in terms of their nutrition. So thank you very much, Mazin. I think we're going to move along and see what Rabbi Arik Ascherman has sent to us. And before I go there, I'm going to read the questions that I sent to him. He didn't answer all of them completely, and so I may have to add some things, but he did send us some film clips that were taken yesterday and the day before, I believe. And he said it was difficult because he was out in the field working. And I noted in one of the pictures, one of the still pictures that he sent to me, the place where he was filming, he had an Israeli soldier with a rifle standing there right while he was doing it. So I don't know if that restricted him very much, but it might have. So he's currently working to protect shepherds and their flocks from Israeli settlers. And I asked him about his current work and to use a couple of examples. So you'll see that on the film. And he'll give us a little bit of information about the pastoralists and the type of animals that they have and what they're facing. It's not only sheep, there are other animals. And so I asked him to outline his current work, and that will be in one of the videos. I mentioned also the fact that there's a relationship on this situation with sheep and shepherds to the time of the creation of the state of Israel. One of the slogans used in their hasbara, which is propaganda, was a land without people for a people without land. And we know that's not true because 750,000 Palestinian Arabs became refugees at the time. The Israeli leaders, however, were able to convince the Europeans and other Jews that the Arabs had no settled towns or villages because many of the arriving Jews believed that the Arabs were all Bedouin, grazing their animals from place to place, living in tents and having no established towns or villages. And I myself have visited in a rather large town that it's been the permanent home of one group of Bedouin for centuries, actually, long before the state of Israel. But it's listed as an unrecognized village, and it doesn't appear on any Israeli maps. And they suffer a lot of discrimination. I also asked him to talk about whether towns and villages that are not shepherd land are still coming under attack. Some of them have sheep and goats and other animals as well. And he was working to protect houses, towns, and villages. And he was involved in an incident, which I will mention right now. He was trying to protect a home that had been rebuilt already, I believe. And he was attacked by an Israeli settler with a knife. And he actually had to go to the hospital because part of his ear was chopped off. So if you think that rabbis are protected, that's not always the case. I also asked him about something that I will mention after we hear these tapes, but let's see what he has sent us, and we'll just see how much you can pick up from that and learn. Thank you.
Action. Okay. My name is Rabbi Arik Ascherman. I'm going to show you that we are right now in a Palestinian village, Mukhmas, on the outside with our Bedouin families that live. And we're just going to go out and take a look just for a second. We were just here just a few minutes ago when we called the police because a settler and their flock at a new outpost, which is just down this way, was right next to these homes here, which we can take a look at for a second. The homes.
The homes.
And this has been almost a daily occurrence since the settlers set up a new outpost about a week and a half ago. Okay, so in July, I will have been leading Israeli human rights organizations for 29 years. Mazin and I have been in touch in the past, and I'm very sorry that we couldn't do this actually with me live, but I'm glad to have this opportunity. And part of our work is inside Israel, where we help protect the rights of Israelis living in poverty, in need of public housing. But much of the work that I do is protecting Palestinian farmers and shepherds. And whereas we did win an Israeli High Court victory back in 2006, which, in theory at least, requires the Israeli security forces to allow Palestinian farmers to get to the land all year round with protection as needed. That doesn't always happen, of course, but that at least is the law. The shepherding communities are some of the weakest and vulnerable of all the Palestinian communities. And first of all, in February of 2021, Zev Hefer, who is a longtime settler, ideologue, and strategist, and actually a convicted terrorist, said at a conference of Amunah, a organization that he leads, that today our most successful and effective way of taking over and holding on to Palestinian land, of course he didn't say it exactly that way, is through the so-called shepherding outposts. Whereas all settlements are illegal according to international law, although Israel sees them as legal settlements, the outposts are those settlements which, even according to Israel, are not legal. And there's been an explosion of them, growing and growing and growing over the years. And if the settlers are a varied group, some of them more violent, some of them not, some of them simply that went over the 67 border looking for quality of life. The residents of the outposts tend to be ideologic, and certainly the shepherding outposts are ideologically committed to dispossessing Palestinians. And if it's not possible to expel them all, to do whatever they can. And remember that 18 shepherding communities have fled their homes.
אריק, מוחמד מתקשר אליך מפה.
Shepherding communities have fled or actually been literally expelled from their homes since October 7th, since this war. And there were another 3 before the war. And let me make it clear. As someone who has fought the evils of the occupation my entire career, there is absolutely no justification for the barbaric actions of Hamas on October 7th. But what is a tragedy for most of us Israelis, all the people that have been murdered, or are hostages, or raped, with everything else, for the settlers, it has been an opportunity. The situation of Palestinians in the West Bank today, I'm not even talking about Gaza at the moment, is analogous to Japanese Americans after Pearl Harbor. After Pearl Harbor, when the U.S. government put Japanese Americans in camps, almost nobody was willing to help them. It was only in 1988 that the U.S. government apologized and began to compensate, saying what we did was out of a combination of racial prejudice, wartime hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. So the settlers have been taking advantage of this situation to further plans which were made way before this war and in no way connected to this war, other than that they are taking the advantage of the national mood to be able to further their plans. And so a lot of our work is, first of all, physical protective presence. Literally being in a community like we are right now, sometimes to physically stand between Palestinians and settlers. Sometimes we actually did get the police here who came, which don't always come, but they came and told the settlers to keep away. But to legal work, because it's not enough just to protect people if we don't return home all the people that have been expelled. The army has just arrived. I'm going to have to take a pause. Just show the army for a second, and we'll stop. Okay.
I don't know if there was more on that particular part, but I think everyone's gotten the idea. Let's go to the second one because it actually shows what's going on, and I think you need to see this. Okay.
In 3 parts. This is something that doesn't happen every day, but you see behind us this outpost that was created a week and a half ago, and the civil administration of the Israeli army actually came and evacuated it yesterday. It immediately rebuilt itself, which is very typical. After the police came where we started in Qumsiyeh and said and told the settlers that they had to stay away, keep a certain distance from the homes, the army showed up. First of all, they said that I had given a report that there were 40 settlers here, which of course I had it, there weren't. And that means that somebody had tried to falsify the report for me to try to build the claim that we give false reports. This officer may just be a reserve officer who may not be particularly, who knows what his political views are, wanted to know where this outpost is. On the way here, we went by an olive grove belonging to the Palestinians. We're going to go back there with the settler flock that the police officer, at my request, had specifically told the settler not to go into. And again, he went inside the gated, fenced-in olive grove. And so we learn a couple things here. That the settlers, if they've got God on their side, will stop at almost nothing. Even when symbolically outpost is removed, it is immediately rebuilt. There is no real effective work by Israeli security forces to stop the dispossession of Palestinians. And of course, basically, not just this government, which may be the worst that we've ever had, but successive governments have always ultimately either directly backed or turned the other way as settlers have continued their clear plans. And you can read the transcript of Sam Heffer's speech in February 2021, and it wasn't new then either, of their intent to take over Palestinian land, dispossess Palestinians, where possible to expel. We haven't talked much about water. If we were down in the Jordan Valley, we would see again a collaboration. The state has declared some 70% of the Jordan Valley as live fire zones, as nature areas, as this, that, and often when Palestinians need to bring water to their communities, they often have to, even if their homes aren't in one of these zones, they have to travel through them, and they can get their water tanks and tractors confiscated. And of course, people can't live here without water. And that brings me to the last point I'll make. What leads to the shepherding communities fleeing their homes, even if they're not, as sometimes happens, forced to leave at gunpoint, is it's not just the violence and intimidation, it's the economic impact. When settlers, backed by the state, prevent Palestinians from being able to access the grazing lands, and that means you have to buy more feed, and shepherding becomes no longer economically viable. And then you add all the other ways that the state can prevent people from building homes, from doing this, from that, from the other thing. And you get to a situation where it is increasingly difficult to survive as a Palestinian shepherd.
Okay, thank you. I want to just say that in addition to somebody else talking here, in addition to what Arik said, the Palestinians had water collection tanks on their roofs to collect rainwater, and then often the Israeli settlers would fire at those rainwater collectors, and all the water would disappear because it went out through the holes. And they also were using solar collectors, which also helps environmentally. And a lot of that has been destroyed by Israeli settlers, often with the backing of the Israeli army. Okay, Arik sent two more relatively short clips, and I think we should include those. And it's, I think they say a lot. It shows a herd of Israeli sheep being brought into the area. Okay.
Part 3 of this, we've missed seeing this flock, which is already coming back to the outpost in the Palestinian olive grove. We have some, I can send some footage from this morning where we caught them also. But that's where they're coming from. And we are only maybe not much more than a kilometer from the village of Mukhmas. We're near a more established settlements of Malay Mukhmas and Neve Erez over here. And this is the way that Palestinians are squeezed. And again, what Zev Heifer advocated was fighting flocks with flocks, using settler flocks to drive out Palestinian flocks.
Basically, they drive out the Palestinian flocks by consuming all of the grasses and other feed that would be available. Okay. All right. We have one more short recording.
There's one more. We'll see how it looks like it's sideways. We'll give it a try.
בואנה אחי, אתה לא נורמלי. ישעיהו לא אמר לך לא להיכנס לזיתים? מה? יותר התאממת לי, לא, אני לא פוגע, אני לא פוגע. נכנסת לזיתים, מה שהמשטרה אמרה לך שאסור. חבל שאין פה חוק, אחרת היית נענש כנראה.
That finishes the film clips that he sent. The important thing to notice about this is that it's not only Palestinians who are working on behalf of Palestinians, but there are a lot of Jewish people, including even rabbis, and that there are many ways that what originally belonged to Palestinians has been taken over by Palestinian or by Israeli settlers, and a lot of the occupations that people had have been disappeared. You can say that. One of the things that I learned in talking with Arik is that there's actually a whole group of people. He's not working alone, but there's a whole group of people who can be found on Facebook. If you look for their site, it's called Jordan Valley Activists. And I think hopefully we'll get that put up on the screen. And let me tell you a little bit about them. Jordan Valley Activists is a group of volunteers whose main goal is to help the Palestinian shepherd communities continue to maintain their livelihood in the face of injustices of the occupation, and to protect them from violence by settlers and by the Israeli authorities. As I said, they have a Facebook page, and it's actually very good, and it shows not just sheep, but some of the other animals that they're trying to protect. And there can also be more information found at a website called jordanvalleysolidarity.com, or .org rather. And I think those are both being put up on the screen. And if you want to look up more about that, hopefully.
Yes, those are in the chat. Thank you, Barbara. I believe you were allowing a little time for questions. Is that?
Yeah, I hope.
Are you almost there, or?
Yeah, I hope that we can do some questions. I noticed that there's been a hand up for a little while,
Yep.
but we were going ahead. So,
are you ready for that now, or do you have something else?
Mazin can come back on screen and
sure.
Questions.
Sure, somebody can spotlight him. And if you're ready for the question, yes, I will. Laura is already unmuted. Okay, go ahead, Laura.
Oh, sorry, I don't know how my hand got up. Sorry, but Mazin, hold on. That is so bizarre. It's a sign, Mazin, to say hello. We met at the Building the New World conference in Radford, Virginia, and I am an avid follower of your work, and my sympathies go out to you and the Palestinians, and thank you so much for being part of this Congress.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I wasn't sure if you were. Thanks, Laura, for that message. Questions. We do have a little time for questions and answers, and I'm expecting some hands, and there's Randy. So let's unmute Randy.
So I watched a special on Al-Jazeera about this. The UN says that the best they can hope for is you get a two-state solution. Now, what kind of treaty? I just heard that Israel turned down a treaty with Hamas just recently about a prisoner exchange. What do you think about all that that's happened now?
In brief, it's a waste of time to be talking about two states for two people. That's a delusion and illusion. Never in history of colonization have you had such an outcome, and will never have such an outcome in colonial situations for reasons I articulate in my book. If you want to read more, you can just read it on my website, which is Qumsiyeh.org. The book is called Sharing the Land of Canaan. But basically, colonial struggles, and I'm in countries here with colonialism like Australia and New Zealand and speaking tour, and just about every country on earth had colonialism. This is one of the worst colonial systems that we have seen. Of course, the Israeli colonization of Palestine, where you have basically 15 million Palestinians in the world. 8 million of us are refugees or displaced people. What do we want? We want our right to return to our homes and lands. We want equality and justice, basically. That's, I'm wearing the T-shirt of the Aboriginal Australians, land back. We demand basically our rights as indigenous people of the land. These colonial settlers that are taking land free, stealing land from our people, that's a problem. The problem is not Hamas ceasefire with Gaza. Hamas was created in 1988, actually with the help of Israel. to provide divide and conquer and to create an alternative for the secular PLO. But Hamas is not the problem. Hamas is one of 12 resistance movements. Whether they have a ceasefire with Israel or not, temporary ceasefire, as they call it, is not going to solve the underlying problem. The underlying problem is the creation of a Jewish state in a country that was multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious, and even multilingual society. Before 1948, we had 44 languages spoken in Palestine. And this attempt to create a Jewish state that has failed and is failing is the cause of the ongoing genocide that has been going on for 76 years, where 160,000 Palestinians so far have been killed. 70% of them are children and women. So this is what we are facing. And I'm in the medical field, and I say if I, God forbid, have cancer, and somebody is trying to treat the cancer by treating two of its symptoms, if I have cancer, I may have headache and anemia. And if somebody tells me, well, for the headache, take some aspirin, for the skin rash, take some cream, for the anemia, eat some spinach, that is not curing my cancer, that's killing me, basically. So I think we need a more actual therapy and that's decolonization. And decolonization is happening in 170 countries around the world. And there are only 2 or 3 ongoing active colonization. This is one of them. Another one is Western Sahara with Morocco, ethnically cleansing the Saharan people. So if you think about the outcomes of decolonization, there's a whole body of literature for that can address it.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, we had another question that just disappeared. Oh, there you are. There you are. Let's go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, Doctor. Thank you so much. I want to let you know, first of all, that I'm like I said, I don't know if you heard, I'm the local WILF branch contact in Washington, D.C. I've also spent about 10 years working on war crimes prosecutions. I started in Syria and then worked on Yemen, and then Sudan. And of course, Palestine has been ongoing. And I want you to know that on the one hand, I think that, and everyone who's worked in the field says that what's happening right now in Gaza and in Palestine is unlike anything they've seen in Cambodia, Rwanda, anything else. And then on the other hand, at the same time, from what I can tell, the innovation and the creativity of the Palestinian lawyers who are working around the clock and around the world and in unbelievable solidarity with attorneys in South Africa and Nicaragua and Ireland and different places is truly, I mean, it's amazing. I don't know how to describe it. It's something as well that I don't think we've ever seen before. So I want you to know that I am here in solidarity. I also want to kind of delicately share with you, I want to be careful for purposes of attorney-client privilege, but there's really interesting things happening here in terms of civil rights strategic litigation on the ground due to civil rights violations in terms of how people are being treated, Palestinian protesters are being treated in universities, encampments, in front of the Israeli embassy, and different things. And so I just wanted to follow up with a question, which is that for someone like me, I'm in touch with Legal and a few other groups, but if you would like to let us know, attorneys, anything that we should be paying attention to and making sure that we're fortifying from a strategic legal perspective, please let me know or let us know. I would like to make sure that we're tracking that.
Oh, that'd be great. I put my email in the email chat. If you could send me your email, I will write to you separately. It is indeed heartening to see all the movement around the world. Hundreds of millions of people are mobilizing. All my events here, 4 or 5 talks a day, have been booked solid, oversold, people standing room only. There's a lot of interest. I addressed rallies like in Sydney and Melbourne with thousands of people. There has been a lot of movement around the world, and we should intensify it. And we should, accelerate the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. There's a lot to be done to stop this genocide. That's basically in the hour that I've been on this call, I know at least a few children, women would be killed in Gaza by starvation or by death from above, as I say, by diseases. So we really need to stop this urgently. And so the onus is on us to redouble our efforts. And I'd love to network with you and work with you on that.
And Tara, can you take another minute to share the national movement against Day and Zimmerman's actions? Do you want to give us?
Yes. Okay. So I would categorize what's happening in the legal realm vis-a-vis solidarity with Palestine into 3 categories. So the first one is fortifying and civil rights litigation on the ground in the universities, encampments, in front of the Israeli embassy, and then there should be a class action lawsuit because of the way that so many people are being targeted in their jobs, even when they have nothing to do, like their job has nothing to do with anything, but somehow Zionism just has such a tight grip on everything in this country that, I have a friend who was who works on a radio station, and she's a radio host on a Spanish language radio station. And she shared that she was doing some kind of Palestine event, and the person at the top of the radio station got her in trouble for it. Like nothing to do with anything. She's allowed to, but she could talk about anything she wants to, but in this case, no. So that's one aspect, is civil rights litigation.
Okay, and do the rest in 2 minutes.
Okay, then the second one is what's happening at the International Criminal Tribunal or at the international human rights level. And then the middle one is basically strategic litigation to try to stop the sales of weapons to Israel. And an example of that is, I'm going to put it in the chat, Doctor, and you can take a look, but basically they've been giving different weapons suppliers notice and demand letters, basically putting these companies on notice that they're violating human rights and that they could be held liable. And I think that there's a strong argument for that, because what's happening at the ICJ can be used as authoritative in the US courts and the British courts and the German courts. So I'm going to follow up in the chat with information about what's happening on that front.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you. Cindy, we are supposed to go to a little culture break right now. Is your question one we can do quickly? Let's unmute you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, you got muted again.
I guess okay. I just wanted to ask Mazin very quickly if you had any suggestions of as a location we could donate to that might be helpful in any respect.
Donations you can send to UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Work Agency, or the Palestinian Red Cross, 2 reputable organizations.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, all right. Thank you. There are many, yes, some that, Barbara, do you want to give us a wind up? Thanks.
Yeah, I do. I just want to say, I want to thank everyone for attending, and especially again, thank Mazin for getting up so early in the morning where he is located. But also, I want to let you know that there is more information about Arik Ascherman. If you look his name up online, there are several videos of various things that happened, including the attack against him. And you can see a lot of the good work that he does because you didn't get a chance to really interact with him. And if anybody who is in this discussion with us right now, if any of you are feeling like it's very upsetting and you need to debrief from it, please let us know in the chat, and we'll see what we can manage to do in terms of a breakout room for that later. Thank you.
Appreciate that offer, Barbara. It is hard work and it's important. I appreciate you making that available in your preparations. We are not going to have any more questions. Sorry, Darian. You can put them in the chat. Thanks, Tura, for adding the name. We are going to queue up, and I will give a short introduction. Let me do that. We're going to queue up a poem now, offered to us by Rachel Betesh. She is a registered nurse and a poet. Well, I'll let her say that. Actually, what I will say is that I learned about her through Philadelphia Actions that is called Fridays at Fetterman. She has joined the vigils outside of Senator Fetterman's office, and she joined Actions, and we really appreciate her presence. And she also was busy today, so she sent us a video. So thank you for queuing that up, and I am going mute.
Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Betesh. I'm a nurse, a gardener, a mother, and a poet. I'm a member of Jewish Voice for Peace and Jewish Mothers Against War Crimes. This poem is called My Daughter Asks Me Where Rafa Is. Then she picks up a piece of fruit and says, "Look, Mama, this apple has a long neck." I slice the apple in pieces and tell her, Rafa is a city in Gaza, in Palestine. The sun moves through the kitchen window, golden enough not just to stop time, not to pause it, not simply to cease the fire, but to unstack its kindling, every twig. And I put the apple back together, its red skin intact. Just then, Israeli planes fly backwards across the acres of orchards, pulling the ruined fruit up off the ruined ground, hitching each olive, lemon, loquat, persimmon to its stem, hitching each shorn limb to each shorn branch of each and every broken tree. In Gaza City, a flutter of wings lands on the rubble, finches and canaries feasting on birdseed, tossed up by a little boy who no longer needs to eat it himself. In Gaza City, the girl in the bombed-out car stirs and opens her eyes watching her cousins. Their hearts begin beating, and their breath comes back warm as they say her name that vanishes from the headlines, from the algorithm. Her name, just a small song in script around her neck. In Gaza City, journalists report on the climbing count of heartbeats until there are so many we can hear them, even from here. Thousands, then tens of thousands. Teenagers in sand-colored uniforms scurry backwards into sand-colored tanks, bearing flags with a star made out of triangles. The tanks roll backwards, uncrushing the splintered legs of beetles, unbillowing plumes of dust. At the army bases, The teenagers fold up their sand-colored pants, put back on their each-colored clothes. Home with their mothers, they tuck their draft papers back into dark envelopes, then seal them with the palms of their hands. The old man who pretends to lead one country unclasps his pale hands from the back of the old man who pretends to lead another, their embrace replaced by a brief stillness. Then the clatter of pots and pans in the rebuilt kitchens of busy grandmothers rifling through their shelves. My grandfather, long gone, visits the village of his birth, a village of courtyards and bakeries and bathhouses, Jew who loved sesame and apricots, who left home when he too would have been conscripted. When once there was a war the whole world fell into. The silky hair on my daughter's head shines now in the sun. She who looks like me, I who look like my grandfather whose palms used to rest on my head, chanting by heart the prayer we send now in reverse, singing up from the crowns of our heads into the waiting hands of our ancestors, blessing them with safety, singing up into the open palms of Palestinian families from the village of Deir Yassin, who returned there with their grandfathers together, keys in their pockets, keys around their necks, each blue door unlocking like jasmine blooms at night. Their trees resettle with apricots. Broken glass becomes windows, greenhouses, jars full of grape leaves. Ships carry only sesame, sumac, and apples. Fish gleam silver in the waters beside the boats. Rafah is a city in Gaza. My daughter asks me. I tell her, my eyes on the nape of her neck. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel.
That seems like the same one, is it?
It starts the same, but the name is different. She's
Betesh. I'm a nurse, a gardener, a mother, and a poet. I'm a member of Jewish Voice for Peace and Jewish Mothers Against War Crimes. Young American Jews are often encouraged to travel to Israel on trips sponsored by schools, camps, and youth groups. Yet the history taught to us is about our own suffering. We are not taught about the Palestinian people whose lives were dismantled so the world could grant us refuge. Those of us who face and grapple with the full story of Israel and Palestine, past and present, often do so on our own, outside of institutions and outside of our families. This poem is a story from when I was 16. Israeli military base, 1999. We were given shirts the color of olives, the gray-green, the many pockets, what soldiers call fatigues, like the absolute tiredness of safe haven, homeland, hold this gun, or guns since there were enough for each of us. We came from leafy towns, and I mean maple, dogwoods, gutters, and cut grass, but we were in a land of cactus and oranges. Aren't I remembering or forgetting some kind of detail that the soldier hosting us was named Lilach, which means lilac, or even just the color purple, of bruised skin the day after the harm. Her hair was long and bright yellow, braided down her olive green back. At school, we'd always learned that blonde Jews were easier to hide on farms or in villages in Denmark, Holland, France. We'd all dreamed unironically of the Gestapo, of German boots, of running back or towards, away, even among the maples, dogwoods, gutters, and cut grass. Anyway, Lilach led us to a shooting range where we were shown how to lay on our stomachs, the smooth organ of hunger that turns to see the paper cutout, not just circles, but the shape of a man who may as well have been among oranges, still as a cactus, facing us, made only of lines, like borders, without eyes. If he'd had hair, we would have recognized it, thick and dark, like what grew from our heads, arms, legs, knuckles, knowing not once about the Nakba, never hearing the word for that catastrophe.
A mess now.
Here is the sound. And
the IDF didn't do the job when they were supposed to free the hostages.
I wouldn't, then as now, trembling and stubborn. So Lilach gave me noise-canceling headphones, sent me to sit and wait on a stone wall, while one by one the gunshots, the roar of not what we did or didn't, but what we were taught to do. Thank you.
We are ready for our next presentation, our presentation on Cuba.
Presentation is called Cuba, State Sponsor of Peace. And hopefully all of you will be really interested. See you soon.
We decided to cut the video a little short because we're short of time. But I do want to welcome you to the Cuba and the Bolivarian Alliance Issues Committee workshop entitled Cuba, State Sponsor of Peace. And thank you to Deborah Goldman for that opening video. And I will introduce Deb later on in this workshop. Just by way of introduction, my name is Cindy Domingo, and along with Leni Reeves, we are the co-chairs of the Cuba and the Bolivarian Alliance Issues Committee. And I hope that this workshop will entice you to join our committee, which meets monthly. Just by way of introduction, the war on the peoples of the world takes form in many ways. The war in Gaza and in Ukraine are the most visible wars, causing untold suffering and death. Meanwhile, the U.S. carries out war through sanctions against 39 countries. The 64-year-old U.S. blockade of Cuba, compounded by Trump's policy and continued by Biden, placing Cuba on the list of state sponsors of terrorism. In this workshop, we want to look at the myths perpetrated in the media and by the U.S. about Cuba today versus the advancements that many of us see in Cuba, where Cuba is really trying to create a zone of peace and participatory democracy. Lastly, it is our premise that it is the U.S. policies towards Cuba that is the main impediment to the development of that vision that Cuba is trying to implement and to create a true democracy in Cuba. We have a couple of presentations today and two very short videos later on in the program that we are going to show, and then have some discussion and Q&A, as well as suggestions about what you can do to change U.S. foreign policy towards Cuba. And during this program, please feel free to put your questions in the chat and we can take them up at the end. But first, we'd like to just take a couple of minutes for us to say, and all of you to say, what are some of the questions you have about Cuba and some of the myths or things you have heard about Cuba and U.S. foreign policy? So if you want to go ahead and raise your hand, we can unmute you and you can say very shortly, what are some of those myths or questions you would like answered in this discussion? Cheryl? Let's see.
Was Trump able to add you to the state list? Did he not? He didn't have to go through Congress. He could do it all by himself.
Yes, he did it. He did it, and Biden could remove Cuba from that list with one signature. Judith?
To move this forward, to get them moved off the list.
Okay, we're going to go through that later on. Odile. I have been told by my friend Ken Parks, who has a family in Cuba, that the condition of the Cuban is much dire right now in terms of getting food. There is long lines. They only eat chicken from the big companies, and he's trying to enable them to have their own chicken, but it's not easy. Anyway, that the food is much dire. And can you tell us about the economic situation of Cuba, please? Thank you. I think Leni's going to cover that. Judith? Did I already call on you, Judith?
Judy? Me?
Yeah, go ahead, Judy.
Travel. How about a WILP travel to Havana, or not Havana, some farm and community group?
Okay, we're gonna talk about that under what you can do. Eileen.
Okay. I was hoping to find out if it's more difficult to visit, as you have been doing, I thought, almost yearly. Is it more difficult now?
Okay. And Tara.
I spent a couple of months in Cuba in 2016. I think it was 2016. And I spent some time on a tobacco farm in Vernado, and there the folks at the farm said that they're basically they were talking about the corruption of the Castro family, and we're saying that, like, you know, they send out these government workers to come and like make sure that every single tobacco leaf is accounted for, and you know, basically the Castro family is like swiping some and stuff like this. So I just wanted to know if you could speak a little bit about, you know, the you know, corrupted power in the country, and if this is like something that's actually going on, or if it's the perception of the farmers or the people who feel that they're being kind of overly scrutinized by the political power there.
We can take that at the end. And then G.
So I don't understand the symbolicism of having like Guantanamo Bay there. If they're a state sponsor of terrorism, why would they have a camp there that they're, I mean, are they trying to intimidate Cuba, or what is the relationship there?
Okay. All right. Oh, Leni, you're muted. Okay. So thank you for that. And so we're gonna turn to we'll answer some of those at the end. If we forget, please re-raise them and put it in the chat. I want to introduce Leni Reeves again, the co-chair of the Cuba and the Bolivarian Alliance Committee. And as the opening slide said, she's a former United Farm Workers volunteer who went to school to become a doctor and did some pediatric emergency medicine for years in the Central Valley of California. She's active in WILF, both in the Fresno branch and our committee. And she's also involved with other Cuba Solidarity Actions, Saving Lives Campaign, Pastors for Peace, and spends significant time in Cuba, where she has developed very long and close ties. So, Leni.
Hi, I'm Leni. As many of you know, I'm going to talk first about what Cuba's facing, and then I am going to talk about what Cuba is doing that seems to be so threatening to the United States. What is it we blame Cuba for? What's so terrible about Cuba? It may surprise you. So Cuba has suffered a continuous U.S. blockade since 1960. It is a blockade. It's a form of siege warfare. It's not an embargo, as the U.S. government calls it, because it definitely includes pressuring other countries and companies in other countries. And the intention is to deny Cuba the chance to trade with anyone, anywhere. It causes a lot of suffering, and it's intended to. The purpose of the blockade is, here's a quote from a State Department memo, to weaken the economic life of Cuba, a line of action which makes the greatest inroads in denying money and supplies to Cuba, to decrease monetary and real wages, to bring about hunger, desperation, and overthrow a government. That's what the U.S. State Department says. So why, if Cuba's been dealing with the U.S. blockade for 64 years, are things worse now? Leni Reeves, who's director of imports of medical products for the Ministry of Public Health, explains, the blockade against the island has intensified. Its extraterritorial nature has increased even more. It's not enough for the U.S. government to apply the blockade directly against Cuba. It also sanctions or severely fines entities from other nations that carry out commercial operations with our country. So we receive more and more refusals, not only from companies and factories, but also from banks, shipping companies, and even airlines during the negotiation process. And we're surprised with refusals issued with no previous notice, even at the time of execution of a contract or at the time of moving the goods to our country. And in an increasingly, that's the end of the quote, in an increasingly digitized world, there are now no workarounds. And the U.S. has been trying harder to cut off all Cuban trade and sources of revenue. If there's no good way to threaten the providers, such as fuel imports from Mexico, they go after the shipping companies and even the maritime insurance companies. Late in 2019, the Trump administration created 243 additional measures to tighten the blockade, and activated Title III of the Helms-Burton Act, which says anyone whose property was nationalized after the 1959 Cuban Revolution can sue any individual or company profiting from their former holdings. Title III violates international law. It also stops cruise ships from docking in Cuban ports for fear of being sued. Days before leaving office, Trump placed Cuba on the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism. Let's call it the SSOT list for short. Biden promised during his campaign to return to Obama-Cuba policies, but he hasn't done this. This isn't the blockade, embargo that only Congress can change. Biden alone could remove Cuba from this list. Instead of removing Cuba from the list, Biden's State Department renewed it. And they cited only two reasons. And the first was Cuba's refusal to extradite Colombian rebel leaders in 2016 after peace talks broke down. But Colombia's current president, Petro, has expressed appreciation for Cuba's key role in the Colombian peace process and said they don't want anyone extradited. So that's invalid. And the only other justification for Cuba being on this list is, again, here's a quote from the State Department again, Cuba also continues to harbor several U.S. fugitives from justice wanted on charges related to political violence, many of whom have resided in Cuba for decades. That's why I have Asada's autobiography behind me. In other words, Cuba's designation as a state sponsor of terrorism is entirely and completely based on Cuba offering asylum to U.S. political prisoners of the COINTEL war on Black America. Don't be confused, by the way, by recent reports that Cuba's been removed from the countries not cooperating with the U.S. on counterterrorism. That's a different list. With Cuba on the state sponsors of terrorism, or SSOT list, banks internationally won't handle Cuban financial transactions, even for food and medicine. The SSOT list signals to anyone who does business with Cuba that the U.S. government may try to retaliate against them. Being on this list is causing terrible harm to Cuba, including the healthcare system. So we've established that the U.S. is trying in a sustained and serious way to crush Cuba. So what is it that provokes this merciless attack? What is it about Cuba? What is it they do that has so much influence worldwide? Cuba is trying to build a just, equitable society. It's definitely still a work in progress, but here's just some of the progress so far. In health, education, global cooperation, healthcare, women's rights, LGBTQI+ rights, and more. And believe me, if we had 24 hours, I couldn't, finish the list of all the things that Cuba is doing. Cuba is about literacy and education. Immediately after the triumph of the revolution, a huge literacy campaign brought Cuba from about 60% to 99% literacy. And it hasn't dropped since, because Cuba has a free, universally accessible system of education, all the way from nursery schools to university, including graduate degrees and medical school. Another thing is Cuba values children. All children go to school. They're all adequately nourished, immunized, dressed, and with shoes on their feet. There are no working children. There are no street children. In Cuba, healthcare is a human right. Cuba has a free, universally accessible, community-based health system which focuses on prevention and what the Cubans call biopsychosocial medicine, what we might term holistic healthcare. Also, Cuba makes international cooperation and global South-South solidarity a priority. Cuba's been sending doctors to places that need them starting in 1963, after Algeria finally won independence. There have been stable Cuban medical presences in the poor and rural areas of more than 100 countries. Then, in 2005, Cuba created a corps of healthcare workers, doctors and nurses and others specially trained in disaster response, the Leni Reeves Brigade, which has worked in hundreds of countries hit by disasters and by epidemics. They were essential in the Ebola epidemic in West Africa and the cholera epidemic in Haiti and in hundreds of other places. They offered to come to New Orleans after Katrina. Bush refused. It's hard to think of a negative aspect to sending doctors internationally who will work in countries with insufficient health care and go to areas where private medicine, accustomed to urban settings and patients with money, will not go. It takes a really special malicious inventiveness to find a way to attack this initiative, and the US has that. The US government claims that the Cuban healthcare workers are trafficked and put Cuba on the human trafficking list. And this is patently false. Scholars and journalists have noted the same thing that I've seen, which is that Cubans volunteer for international medical missions from a combination of idealism and the opportunity to make some extra money. The US, and this is important, has been threatening countries that invite Cuban doctors and nurses with also getting put on a list accused of human trafficking for trying to get care for their people. Again, these lists have severe economic consequences. When Hurricanes Mitch and George devastated the Caribbean region in 1996, Cuba immediately sent aid and medical workers to the affected countries. But noting that routine treatable diseases kill more people than disasters, and that what's needed is not just aid, but the presence of doctors caring for poor patients in their own countries, Cuba created the Latin American School of Medicine, ELAM, so that people could study medicine on full scholarship and go home and care for poor people in their own countries. Then countries outside Latin America said, what about us? And ELAM expanded to include students from well over 100 countries all over the world. When I visited ELAM and sat in on a class, I was sitting next to a Palestinian student and a South African student sitting side by side. And then Betty Thompson, bless his heart, said, there are places in the Delta that are as third world as anywhere. And Cuba created full scholarships for US students. There are now about 200 US graduates completing their training and working in primary care. Most of them are people of color and from poor backgrounds, people who would have had no chance to study medicine in the US. Also, Cuba's a world leader in women's rights. Women established their right to full participation in every phase of the revolution from the very start. Women are represented. They are out more than 50% of parliament. This is also true for any other statistic you can look at. More than 50% of scientists are women. More than 50% of the equivalent of attorney generals are women. There's a national Cuban women's organization, the FMC, to which more than 80% of Cuban women over the age of 16 belong. Cuba legalized abortion in 1965. Cuba was the first country in the whole Western Hemisphere to allow women control over their own bodies. And women who choose to have children are supported by an excellent prenatal care and community support system that have reduced Cuba's infant mortality rates below those of the US. The difference is even more marked, very much more marked, for Black infants. Parental leave rights are also guaranteed. I don't have to explain CEDAW in this group. The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women was immediately signed and ratified by Cuba. All discrimination against women has been outlawed since the first constitution, and the protections have increased in every subsequent constitution. Cuba is a leader in LGBTQI+ rights. After creating a remarkable new constitution in 2019 with a preamble declaring that it was inspired by the indigenous people who resisted conquest and by the enslaved people who rebelled, Cuba set out to create a body of family law that would be worthy of that kind of inspiration. And recognizing that even the best laws can't function without a change in attitudes, people in Cuba have been working for decades on the process of change so that they were able to pass by popular referendum with a 67% approval, the Families Code that includes the protection of the right of all people to form a family without discrimination, that updates the legal definition of family institutions with inclusive rather than strictly heteronormative models, that establishes the right to a family life free of violence, that treats children as the responsibility of their parents rather than as possessions, that centers values of love, affection, solidarity, and responsibility, and believe me, so much more. So Cuba is also a world leader in what we call, I guess, diversity, equity, and inclusion. In addition to changing not just law and opinion around issues of gender and sexuality, rights and attitudes, taking Cuba from a traditional patriarchal homophobic nation to an inclusive one, Cuba, which outlawed racial discrimination from the very first days of the revolution, has realized that more is needed than to declare that humankind is all one race and we're all Cubans together. There are already monuments to enslaved people who struggled and fought for freedom, and now problems of a Eurocentric view in the school curriculum and an unrecognized discrimination are beginning to be seriously addressed. Cuba keeps moving forward, although the economic problems created by the blockade do increase disparities. Cuba lets us know that it's possible to win. Cuba lets us know that it's possible to resist. Over 60 years of attacks, including invasion, biological warfare, sabotage, and unremitting siege warfare of the blockade by the most powerful empire in history, us, they haven't conquered Cuba. People have suffered, but they haven't given up. Cuba lets us know that it's possible to do things differently. Cuba's a model for the world, and in particular, for Latin America. And that's why the US is so terrified by Cuba.
Thank you, Leni. So we're going to very quickly move to Kathryn Hall-Trujillo. I just want to say that most of us that are part of the WILF's Cuban Bolivarian Issues Committee are also part of another group, U.S. Women in Cuba Collaboration, and we work very closely together. And we'll talk more about our work at the end. So I want to introduce Kathryn Hall-Trujillo, referred to many, especially her students and community members, as Mama Cat, and she's the founder of the Birthing Project USA, and is currently an ambassador with the Federation of International Gender and Human Rights, FIRE. She teaches on-site Cuba public health courses at Cuba's National School of Public Health and Charles Drew University of Medicine, and serves on the U.S. Elam Medical School Advisory Group that is with the IFCO for Pastors for Peace. Please, Kathryn.
Well, thank you. I'm really happy to be here and be a part of this conversation because it makes me feel Cuban in the sense that the thing that I've learned most about being a part of Cuba for the last 23 years is that one of the things that keeps you going is knowing that you have joined a village and have an extended family of people who care about peace in the world. And every once in a while, you need to get together and feel that support and that love and that encouragement. So I think that that's one of the main things that's happening these last few days is we're getting together to think about peace. I'm following up on Leni's story about the 500 scholarships that the United States received for our students to attend Elam. At the time that the US received those scholarships, I was founding director of Birthing Project USA, and our core project was a clinic, a grassroots community-based clinic in Sacramento, California. And we were staffed by midwives because we could not afford to hire a doctor. And medical students would come through our clinic and they would volunteer. And as they were running off to do their residency or whatever, they would say, and when we're real doctors, we're going to come back and we're going to work here. Well, when they were real doctors, they owed about $350,000 for that privilege, and they could not afford to come back and work with us. So when I heard that Benny Thompson had protested Cuban doctors being sent to Mississippi, and that Fidel had responded by offering the US 500 scholarships to attend the new medical school in Cuba, I thought, oh my God, we could get a doctor who could afford to work here at our clinic. So thus, I was there when the students got there for the very first cohort, and that's why I am Mama Cat. I consider them my babies, and we have about 230 on the ground now who have not let us down, because this great gift from Cuba has so helped the United States in providing care to people in this country who need doctors who can afford to provide care without having the burden of $350,000 hanging on them over them. This has also given me an opportunity the last 23 years to work side by side with Cuban women, because the majority of the workers in healthcare and research are women. And so as they go about the business of being the wonderful professionals they are, they also bring their full selves. They come as daughters, they come as mothers, sisters, aunties, and grandmothers. And during this time, I have witnessed the hope and excitement of surviving the hard times of the 90s and the continuation of what the Cubans call the transitioning of the vision of the revolution to the next generation of younger Cubans. I am also witnessing them understanding the realities of the blockade, which every day impacts every aspect of their lives, from the time they wake up to ration water until they finally make their way back home at the end of the day due to the lack of gasoline for transportation. We're not talking about a model that we have in the United States, where when you become a doctor, you get to move to a good neighborhood, get a good car, get to go on vacation, get to have assigned days that you work and days that you don't. We're talking about people who work in their communities, who live in the neighborhoods. That's what a community really means in Cuba, who actually have to get to work the best way they can, who have to stand in line and get rations or send somebody in their family to get rations like everyone else. There is no privilege of your profession in Cuba. And these are the people that I work side by side with. And due to the increasing impact and the hardening of the blockade, one of the things that's really affecting the women that I work with every day that I'm there is the impact of immigration. And because of that, one of the basic things that I hadn't thought about is that now women are primarily doing the work in Cuba. And so because the first to go in an immigration situation, to go and look for money, go find money so you could send money back to your family and one day hopefully come back yourself, are the men. And that leaves the women there to not only be the primary caretakers of the families, of the older people who are there, and of the younger people who are there, as well as being the ones who are making up the slack for the ones who are not there, who would normally be working in the professions as well. So now we have the women that I work with, my colleagues, are doing everything that they have to do to make sure that the health system is working, the education system is working, to make sure that if a person is in a house and the house collapses, which houses do all the time, due to the lack of ability to provide a collaboration between funders or money that is really what is needed in Cuba to help maintain the infrastructure system. And that's the main part of the blockade, is to create enough chaos in every sector that people will be so upset and disheartened that they would turn on their country. We can see that that's not happening. What that's doing is making sure that the people who are insisting on staying in their country no matter what are the ones that are bearing the hardship. Ever since I knew I would be speaking to you today about your relationship to Cuban women, I've been thinking about what is it that would make you interested and even care about Cuban women. You know, how do you see them? Why would you care about them? There are so many things that are going on in the world that we as women are saying, in order for us to continue, we have to have peace. And so there is like just a menu. You could pick the one where you're putting your energy and your resources. So I'll tell you, for me, as a midwife, I'm interested in women. I'm fascinated what they can do between joy and tears, their courage, their ability to keep bringing new life in the world. Now that I have been in Cuba for 23 years, I know they model more than professional excellence. They model resilience, community as a verb, and a vision of the possible in spite of the obstacles that are on purpose placed in their past by the blockade. I have been bringing students to Cuba for the last 7 years to really understand the public health system there. And the thing that they take away is that it's possible to have a comprehensive public health care system. And it's also possible for people to care about each other in a way that they have not been able to see in our country for a lot of reasons. But I'm going to wrap this up with like 3 things that I think as women we really can understand. One is the reproductive rights of women that are so infringed upon from the very first time they have their first menstrual cycle. This is when you understand that you don't have access to all the feminine health products that you need. Feminine health products are rationed. That's along with everything else, but that is really your initiation into womanhood in Cuba, is to understand and be aware of the fact that every month you're going to have to figure out how to have enough feminine health products for yourself. This goes right along with the limited access to supplies, procedures, medicine, and even food. Someone asked earlier about food, that you as a woman know that you need not only for yourself, but for your family and for your community. The fact that Cuba had to go to the UN last month and say, we need help with milk, is unthinkable. That a country that leads the way in all those ways that Leni talked about would not have enough milk for their children, would not have enough medicine for their children. And some of you are aware of the campaign to get cancer meds to children. And what this has done is that women in Cuba now have a very low birth rate, because women who are responsible for making sure that women all over the world that are working with Cuban doctors or research in some way have a much better opportunity of having better birth outcomes. These very women are saying, I don't think that I can bring children into this world because I cannot afford them. And because I'm working day and night, I don't have time to really raise them. And the other part, the second thing, is the impact of immigration that's destroying the very family structure that they fought for and have worked so hard to maintain. Again, as Leni talked about with the new Families Code, we use that all over the world as a model of what could be. And the last thing is that this economic disparity that the US is creating is regenerating the same inequities in class and race that Cuba has been so poised to deal with. And so I'm hoping that you, when you think about the impact of the blockade on women, just imagine what your life would be like if you had to start off wondering if you have enough water, wondering how you're going to get to work, and then also wondering how not only you, but your next door neighbor are going to fare. The very, very last thing I want to tell you is the project that I'm working on is the mother-daughter economic projects, where mothers are working with their daughters and daughters with their moms to try to find a way for their daughters to stay in Cuba with them so that their daughters don't have to immigrate to another country to seek a better life. Because the purpose of having a child in the first place was to have a family that would last. And what we're doing is we're managing to break up families that were meant to last. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathryn. Now I want to turn it over to Deb Goldman, who is a retired nurse and also the co-chair of U.S. Women in Cuba Collaboration's Lesbian and Allies Project. Show us a couple of videos. Deb.
Okay, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So recently I had the opportunity and the privilege of visiting Cuba, and it was a wonderful visit. Like Kathryn said, I felt totally embraced. I feel like I have a new family in Cuba. And just the warmth and welcoming, the resiliency, in spite of the blockade, it is really inspiring. And at the same time, it was a worrying trip because of all the things that you've heard from Kathryn and from Leni about the dire situation economically because of the blockade and because we have them on the list of state-sponsored terrorists. So when I was there, I was able to interview several women. We talked a little bit about how the blockade is affecting their lives, their families. And then I talked to some lesbian women about how the new Families Code, which now protects the rights of LGBTQ folks in Cuba, has affected their lives. So the first video I'm going to show is a woman from Havana. Her name is Ollantay Leon. She's a lesbian activist with a group called Afro Diverse Project. And she says that this is an initiative of civil society of a collaborative and participatory nature with an anti-racist and Afro-feminist approach from three fundamental premises: art, health, and community. And their objective is to empower and make visible the Afro-LGBTQ communities and people in Cuba. And then the second video is a lesbian from Cienfuegos. Her name is Liana Mildred Lopez Filippo, and she's with a group called Phoenix, which is one of the many social and educational lesbian activist groups all over the country that work to address homophobia and address other issues related to their LGBT communities. So let's hear from them. So the first one I'm going to show is Ollantay.
Hi, I'm Ollantay Leon, coordinator of the Afro-Diverse Project. I have the initiative as an enterprising woman of the Afro-energetic hairstyle called Afrote Aquila. I am an Afro-feminist activist, and we have an LGBTI project to empower the LGBTI community and all Afro women. For us, the Family Code has been a great achievement because from there we have many benefits as an LGBTI community, and one of the greatest benefits is equal marriage, since that protects us from maintaining the assets that have been created in a couple for a long time. It gives us the assurance that the financial support is also better and that the marriages support each other. That is, in the event that one of the two dies or one divorces the marriage, they can share their assets or they can acquire the assets of the other person.
O las personas, uno se divorcia del matrimonio, puedan compartir sus bienes o puedan adquirir los bienes de la otra persona.
And we have legal support that is very important for us because we can create a family without limitations, and where we can also adopt children in case we want to have one. We can have the pregnancy assisted. That is, for the part of the insemination.
Adoptar hijos en caso de que lo querramos tener, podemos tener el embarazo asistido, es decir, por la parte de la inseminación,
And we have many, many benefits with the family code today, which leads us to have a better life like that of the LGBTI. In addition, this code supports us, and the community in general gives us a little more respect because we already have a protection that leads us to be respected by everyone because they already know that it is a requirement that this respect has to exist. I'm grateful for the interview.
Hey, Deb,
Yeah.
I don't think we'll be able to show the other one. We have a hard stop at, in a few minutes, so sorry.
No problem. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening.
Okay. So we wanted to take a few questions first because we committed to having Q&A. So there were a few questions that were asked at the beginning. Do any of the participants here want to answer those? Leni or Kathryn? Kathryn, you spoke a little bit to the food situation. Does anyone want to go a little bit more into detail about that, the shortages? Leni?
I would say that the food situation is very serious. I don't think people are starving, but I think people really do have to stand in line in order to get food. And one of the things I learned is that the physicians are still involved in trying to make sure that when food is rationed, it's not just first come, first serve, but that people also, they're trying to figure out how people could get things they need. For example, if you have hypertension and you need certain things, like maybe they're trying to, it's not just a ration and a free-for-all, is that they're still trying to put thought into helping people get the food they need for their medical conditions as much as possible. They also are investing a lot in gardening and things like that to try to help, but it really is a dire situation. And the stress that is there when you have to think about getting food every single day, and because the electrical grid is out and there's something that cannot be fixed because of the blockade, your refrigerator is probably breaking, or not, your refrigerator is not staying on consistently. So after you've stood in line all this time to get some food, you are hoping that your food doesn't spoil, and then you have to go stand in line and get some more. So when you just kind of think all the way through, that's the situation I would say exists right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. I just like to add really quickly that the U.S. has correctly identified fuel as being a really vulnerable point, and it affects everything about the food. For example, you can have the greatest farmers raising food organically. Somebody estimated that 1/3 of Cuban food crops don't make it to the consumer. They spoil because there's no transport.
And that's the same thing with water. I was reading report today on water that they lose about 60% of the water they do have because cracks in the system, the water system, and the corrosion of the pipes or whatever, that they really do not have the ability to fix.
There's permanent wet spots in the street in Marianao in a lot of different areas. You're not going to see that if you just stick to the tourist areas, but it's there.
Carolyn, you had your hand up a bit ago. Are you still on here? Did you still want to ask your question?
That's you, Carol. Huh? She's asking you. I didn't have that hand up. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Lois has a hand up then.
Hi, I'm Lois Herman with WILP. And
I don't know his question.
Here we go. I would like to know if Cuba has a relationship with FAO and WFP, the World Food Program,
yes,
to help the food needs in the country.
Yes, Cuba has those relationships. The problem is that Cuba is an island. Cuba has to import anything it can't grow. Its diet is based on a European diet, which includes bread. You can't grow wheat in Cuba. Interestingly enough, you can't even grow zucchini in Cuba. Cuba doesn't have an indigenous food culture left. So all the food traditions in Cuba either come from Africa or from Europe.
There was a question about Guantanamo, and after that question, then we'll, I'm going to move into what can we do before we end.
Well, I want to, yeah. Many of you may not know that in 2014, the whole Caribbean region and Latin America was made a zone of peace by CELAC. It's like 34 nations. And so having this military base where we periodically send nuclear subs, just to be provocative, and where we routinely confine and torture people, it's intended as a provocation. It's intended as a demonstration of our power and Cuba's relative helplessness to do anything about that. And when I say our, I'm speaking of the US government. It would be nice to think we were not complicit, but unless we're, you know, living on another planet, I'm afraid we are.
I'm going to move into what we can do, because if there's one thing that we can do is to pressure President Biden to take Cuba off the SSOT list. So we need everyone to call, to write Biden and say, take Cuba off the SSOT list. And in particular, connected with the SSOT campaign, we have a campaign around pacemakers. We have in the next couple months, we need to raise $150,000 to send 300 heart pacemakers to Cuba. $500 will buy one, and Cuban surgeons will then implant it at no cost to the patient. So on the screen, you'll see, and we can send that out if you're interested. We'll also have it posted eventually on the WILF Cuba page about how you can participate that. The SSOT forbids Cuba to import many different products that have more than 10% of US products in it or production in it. And so this is one concrete way. They've already made connections. Global Health Partners have already made connections with a European maker to purchase those particular pacemakers. And so those are two things you can do. Pressure Biden to lift, to take Cuba off the list, and then also to provide these cardiac pacemakers for Cubans in the next couple months. Thirdly, as we have talked, or we haven't talked about it, is that long term, it will take an act of Congress now to lift the blockade. ASERI, which is a fairly new lobbying group to change US policy towards Cuba, was formed. It stands for the Alliance for Cuba for Engagement and Respect, and it has a toolkit on the removal of Cuba from the SSOT list. And so you can also send letters if you have time, to send letters to your Congress people, also telling them, because many Congress people don't know anything about the SSOT list, but there are many members that are actively also working. Barbara Lee, Pramila Jayapal, the squad are all working to lift the blockade. In terms of educational materials, there is a fairly new media outlet called Belly of the Beast, and they have a number of films, short and medium-length documentaries that are very appealing and very informative on current issues dealing with Cuba. It is based in the United States, jointly produced with our Cuban partners, and they are on YouTube, and also have a website under bellyofthebeastcuba.com. But there are three particular documentaries. There are a number of you that live in the Midwest are very in tuned with agricultural trade and food and farmers. And there's a short video, I think Moon posted it in the chat, around a U.S. delegation that was focused on increasing agricultural trade between Cuba, which would also benefit U.S. farmers to trade with Cuba as they did under the Obama administration. And then there are two new Belly of the Beast documentaries. One is called Uphill on the Hill, which is about current U.S. policy under Biden. Now, a reminder, Biden said he was going to change the Trump administration's Cuba policy. And as Leni said, he only harshened it and kept Trump's, keeping Cuba on the SSOT list. The second documentary is Hardliner on the Hudson, which is about Senator Menendez. And I'm sure most of you have heard that Menendez has been brought up on corruption, cooperating with, acting as a foreign agent with the Egyptian government. And this documentary tells you, because of his chairing of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, how that has also held us hostage to the U.S. foreign policy that is being implemented now on Cuba. So it's a really hard-hitting documentary that I advise or recommend that you watch it, and that's also on YouTube. Lastly, someone asked a question, why aren't we traveling to Cuba? And you can still travel to Cuba. It's more difficult, as it always is. It's still the only place you need a license to travel. There are categories, but we as WILF and the U.S. Women in Cuba Collaboration want to travel in December. So we invite you. We're hoping to get the information up this summer so that we can bring a predominantly women's delegation, but also invite others and your male partners to come, or other males that are on this webinar that you know. We want to have people see for their own eyes, what is it like in Cuba? And if you can't come with us in December, there are other delegations, Building Relations with Cuban Labor, Witness for Peace, Pastors for Peace will probably be going at the end of this year. But we would like you to come with us, because as WILFers, we want to show our solidarity with our sisters in Cuba in particular. And lastly, again, a call to join our Cuba and the Bolivarian Alliance Issues Committee, which will meet on the second Monday of each month. And your contact would be Leni Reeves, and somebody asked for details on a Zoom link, and we can send that out to folks if you are interested. So I think we're out of time. Thank you so much. We don't want to.
Yes, thank you so much. You timed it wonderfully. Really appreciate this presentation with all the links. I know that you have a lot of this on your part of the web page, our web page, and I look forward to being able to use that as reference in the future, as well as the e-news and e-alerts that you send out. So thank you for that.